They say small business is the backbone of America. So what's the best way to support a small business? It is to learn more about them and share with your family and friends. We interview founders from across the world who have started and scaled their business through the ups and downs, long hours, and the rewards that come from sacrificing their time to build their business. Welcome to First to Arrive, Last to Leave, the journey of an entrepreneur. Welcome to another episode of First to Arrive, Last to Leave. I'm here with my co-host, Erin Gregor, the founder of Pod Growth. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I was joking, though. I'm on the other side, and it's really weird over here. It's like
different lighting.
Yeah, I'm just like, where did I wake up? But yeah.
So, Erin, I would love to hear about how you became Erin in the terms of like an entrepreneur, because the more I sit down with you, the more I learn about you, the more I talk about you with other people, the more I learn about you. So I kind of want to hear it in your voice.
Yeah, I've been around for a while. I grew up on a farm, and the only reason I tell that story is because I was bored at the age of 5. I had an older brother and sister, and so at 5, I asked my dad, I need something to do because I'm home by myself, or I wasn't home by myself. So I wasn't neglected, but I was like, everybody else is working, I want a job. And so I've had that since the age of 5, just that work ethic, worked really, really hard, worked hard through college, all that. But as much as my dad was an entrepreneur, he also really instilled in me, go get a job and be safe. Like, I think he just got his butt kicked. And when you're at the mercy of Mother Nature every year, I think it probably takes its toll on you. And so I had that, like, I'm going to go get a job. And so I went and got my first job. It was with Accenture. And they said, what's your asking salary? And I said, $35,000. And they said, we'll pay you $42,000. I was like, oh my gosh. And then like, I got weekends off and holidays. I've never experienced such a thing. And like, it was insane to me. But then at that same time, I read a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it really changed my perspective, where I realized my dad was teaching me the poor dad ways of go and be safe and get a job. Mm-hmm. And so I learned to I started stock trading, I started real estate investing, but I kept my corporate job because I did my calculation. If I got a 3% raise every year, I was going to be rich by 30. So I thought. And so fast forward, I was doing pretty well. I got 27, 28-ish is when I met my first husband. And he was here in Dallas. And I literally had 2 homes. I had a home in Phoenix, and I bought a second home here. And so I lived between the two. And he was a student, a PhD student. He was working on his PhD. And he came to me over the summer, and he was like, I need to work or something. And I said, hey, if you had to work prior to me moving here, you need to work even with me here. I'm not your sugar mama. So he went to Sears, and he was like, this is the worst thing of my life. I cannot do this for the summer. Like, what can we do? And through this whole thing, I'm a huge dog lover. I am a huge dog rescuer. Mm-hmm. And I had this great group of friends in Phoenix where if I went out of town, they'd take my dog and we'd just exchange dogs. And so I was like, well, what do we do now that I had 2 dogs at the time? And long story short, we started and I realized the world of pet sitting. So through that, I was like, okay, well, we'll start this business. Mm-hmm. Had no idea how to start a business, literally Googled my way through it. A year later, we needed somebody to take care of our animals. I was calling everybody. No one would call me back. And so I was like, huh. And this like kind of like, I was still working a corporate job, but like that just like went ding, 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 ding. Mm-hmm. So I taught myself Google AdWords and just doubled down and did great. Like I was a storyteller. So through that blog, I would share stories, and I realized I would drive the traffic to the site, but the stories would sell them. So it was like they'd be looking at 3 different sites, but it was those stories that specifically sold them. Mm-hmm. So I was able to just double down and go in on, in 5 years, I had bought out 2 competitors. I had 12 full-time employees who were working for me, and my ex was getting ready to leave Dallas. So originally our thought process was he was going to get his PhD. We were going to move back to Phoenix. I had an employee who was like, I want to do this full time. She left her accounting job to manage one of the people we had bought. And so I ended up just selling the whole thing to her. Then through that, I just kept trying new businesses. Like the second one was a spray tanning business. And I was like, oh, you know what? I see an opportunity for this. Built a mobile side, had 3 salons, sold that. Yeah. So I just tried different things. Like it was like, I want to try this. And then I like work really hard at it, kind of probably burn myself. We just had a great conversation about burning yourself out, burn myself to a core, but then just see these opportunities and like, I want to try that. I can't imagine, it's like a blessing and a curse. I can't imagine building a business and just sitting on it for 20 years while it grows. Yeah. I mean, it's like a dream, right? You build it where you just, and I'm like, why didn't I do that? Like, I'm like, I'm tired of this. Here you go. And then I start over. I'm like, what am I doing? So I got to shift that mindset. But yeah, so it's just been a journey. I've been around here, and then I know we can talk about, I know you want to talk more about the Entrepreneur Summit, but that was a venture I went into. And through that started, I've always had this same kind of process in my businesses where I can drive traffic, whether it's Google ads, social media ads, whatever. I get that understanding of how to drive traffic. I understand the content part of the storytelling. And I'm able to use that to scale and grow. Yeah. And that's kind of been the same formula throughout the companies. And that's how I ended up getting into podcasting too. That's a long route also. There's a lot.
I'm at a loss for words because
there's a lot.
I didn't even know about those 2 previous. Mm-hmm. So to go from, I like this idea, or this could be, to scaling and selling, like where was your mindset on how?
Yeah. So I learned in my first business, and it's still a lesson to learn, but the biggest lesson I learned in my first business was I had this like need to be the most amazing like I had to be connected to everything. Mm-hmm. And I was the person, and I had to know all our clients, and I had to know all this. And it got to a point where we were getting so busy, I just physically couldn't. And because we had a different, what kept us apart from everyone else was we put this model together that no stranger would ever walk into your home. So you've got companies that are key passers, and you just don't know. We do a lot of rescue. I have insane dogs. I can't have strangers walking into my home because I don't know what's going to happen to you if you do.
Right.
So we had this whole business model that no stranger would ever walk into your home. So you always had a first and a secondary sitter. If your first was unavailable, your secondary was there. And then if we couldn't provide your first or secondary, we would send somebody else to your house for free that you would meet the pack, do all that. We also were very into like, we were pit bulls and Rottweilers. Like, I love those dogs. I'd take them all. So I always wanted to touch all those people. Like, I'd be your secondary if not.
Yeah.
The biggest lesson I learned was when I started bringing on people who could manage. I thought I didn't want to let go of being that touch point. And when all of a sudden they would talk to me about clients, I had no idea who they were. It was the greatest feeling in the world. I'm like, I'm not needed, and everything's running just fine. Mm-hmm. So that's been a growth perspective of I don't need to be the one who's there all the time. And sometimes that's hard, especially when you're trying to, when you've got a balance sheet where it's hard at that sense to keep growing. And I know, like, even as we were growing the podcasting company, because it hasn't been pod growth forever. That's just a new thing. I had a business partner, and that's one thing I kept preaching to her was we've got to set up the pricing. We've got to set up everything that we are replaceable. And that has always been a huge philosophy of I continually am looking at how do I take myself out of the equation and how do I get myself replaceable? Mm-hmm. Because that has been the biggest lesson learned as an entrepreneur. And one of the ways it's like, I got to fit people in here. I don't want to be the one doing this on a Saturday or on a Sunday or at night when my kids need me or whatever it is. Like, I've got to continually get myself out of this and keep putting people in place to do it for me.
Yeah, whom, not how.
Exactly. But that's how I've always thought of scaling. It's not how can I go in and do this, but how do I put the people in place to help me do this and grow?
So what brought you to Entrepreneurs Summit? How did that happen?
A little insanity. So and how I got into podcasting was I went into the online world and started doing like online coaching and online programming. And I was getting on a plane to San Francisco. And I'm like, this is weird. I'm willing to fly halfway across the country to go to an event. but I'm not willing to drive 30 minutes to Dallas to go to an event, because in Dallas it was just the same people over and over and over again. Great people. But I knew if I didn't make the trip down there, that same person was going to speak in 2 weeks anyway. So it was okay. And so I just got this great idea that I was going to put together an event, not knowing what the hell I was doing or ever doing an event before. Mm-hmm. And I had this idea that I was just going to put it out there, and like everybody was going to be like, oh, this is genius, and come. And I was going to fill up. And I thought in 3 months I could get a room of 600 people. Like, it was really crazy. But I put it out there, and like people were into it, not 600 people into it, but people were into it. And it was like the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, like physically. So at this time that I'm putting together my first summit in 3 months, which is just insane. I have a house out in, like, I'm still real estate investing. I have a house out in Phoenix that's like, it's a nightmare. It's like anything that could go wrong with the situation could. Like, I'm trying to plan the summit, and I've got a girl who let a leak go, and like the whole house is molded out. Like, I mean, it's just like, so I'm like piled with stress. I can't, like, I'm consumed with stress. And I'm like, this was, I think, the dumbest thing I've ever done. And I brought in speakers from all over. One of my speakers gets snowed in. Like, I mean, it was just crazy. And I'm like, I did it. I will not have any regrets around this. And I'm so happy I did it. I'm never doing this again. Because physically, like, grinding my teeth, I'm putting on weight. And I cannot describe it how much it's like having a baby. Like, you are 9 months in and you're like, this is miserable. I can never do this again. And then you have the baby, and like 6 weeks later, the baby smiles at you and you're like, let's do this again. So I put this event, and like people are like, this was amazing. Oh my gosh, this event was great. And I'm like, it what really? Like, and people are like connecting, and that's exactly what I wanted for this event. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, and people can learn and they can connect. So when all this started happening, I'm like, I'm going to do another one. And then Erin style, I'm like, I'm going to call Robert Herjavec and see if he's like from Shark Tank. And that's like my dream. That's a dream ask, right? So I have 3 dream asks. Robert Herjavec was one of them. I just really loved him. George W. would be another one. Like, I still think about bringing the summit back to bring George W. on the stage, because we saw him at
Summit.
He's amazing. And I've seen him. It was the second time I've seen him. And Jay-Z. Like, those are like the people I would just love to meet. And but so, excuse me, I put on this bigger event, and it did well. But there's so many moving parts to an event, and not taking my own advice, trying to fill those profits, I was doing it all myself. Like, I had a great AV team, and they were helping me. I had a sales team who was helping me. But there were a lot of parts that I was taking on myself, and it was stressful. And that same Phoenix house is still causing me stress, because I'm trying to sell it now. We had remodeled the whole thing, and now I'm trying to sell it. And it was very hard, because I lost a lot of money, because those speakers are not cheap. There was a lot of, just hotels. I think it's one of the most stressful things to work with a hotel, because the expenses never end. Like, you don't know what you're going to owe until when you finally get the bill, and you get all these pluses. Like, you don't know, like, how many people are going to, like, if you're going to feed, how much coffee you're going to go through.
Oh,
it's like, and the coffee's made of gold, like all these things. And I had a really great year, but I didn't match expenses. So I lost money there. I lost money on this real estate deal. It's just falling apart. I was I don't know if I ever would have like done anything, but I know what feeling at rock bottom felt like, because I felt like I failed everything. And I remember my husband coming home, and I was just sitting there, and he's like, are you okay? I'm like, I'm not. Like, this is so hard right now. Like, I feel, but the problem was too, everybody thought I was killing it. Like, they're like, you've got these people on a stage, you've filled a room. This is amazing. And I'm just smiling like, everything's really great. It's really great. And I was just like, I feel like I'm about to bankrupt my family. I feel like I've screwed everything up. Like, it's fantastic. Thank you. Yes. I love being an entrepreneur, and I'm dying inside. So it was really hard, but I refused to go out that way. And I'm like, I won't let this be the end, and I won't walk away and say I failed, even though I still kind of feel like I did. But I came back a third year, changed things around, and was able to turn the profit. So, and then my husband said, if you ever do this event again, I'll divorce you. So it was very stressful on all of us. But
Yeah.
it's hard because I still loved gathering those people. I still loved putting those people on stage that I knew could help them and offer them. And it's been, I think, 5 years since my last one. And I still hear people like, I met so-and-so through the summit, or I love the summit, or I did this. And it was an ego boost too. Like I literally went into hiding after that. And I get very emotional about this because I was so humiliated by the whole thing, even though to everyone it was amazing. I was so embarrassed because I felt like I just messed up. And I had this like fear that if I came out, people would be like, oh, what is she doing now? Like, oh, now she's onto something else. Like, I really thought people cared a lot more about me than they did. And I had to learn about that. But there was this exercise we did in Goldman where I listed like my network of people. And I'd built this beautiful network of people, just amazing people that I basically just ditched because I literally hid for 3 years because I just was exhausted. And even though like I turned it around and pulled it, it was like it just took everything out of me and I couldn't get out of the hole. So it was a very great experience in many ways. It taught me a lot. It taught me I had these sales, and like I said, it's so crazy to me because I still turned the profit. I still did well, but there was just something that like was screaming failure to me on this and then I'd be like, maybe I don't know how to run a business. Maybe I don't know what I'm doing. So who am I to try to teach others how to do this or do anything about this? And yet to this day, like when people ask about building an event, I'm like, oh no, it was Facebook, it was ads, and it was this, and it was the podcast and getting people to drive. That's how I could, get a room of people. But it was an interesting experience for sure. And I know, like you've mentioned, like people still tell you about it too, which is crazy to me.
Or mention, I've heard so many things about it.
Yeah.
And like, oh, you're working with Erin, and I'm like, oh, and to be honest, before meeting you at Summit, I didn't know you. So it was it's also nice to, reaffirm like, oh, you're like working with great people. Mm-hmm. But I find it interesting because I actually look up to you. I think you're one of the most intelligent people that I've ever met and are extremely articulate. And to see how upsetting that is,
still is.
It makes me upset because I'm like, how dare you think of yourself that way? Because it's hard because there's a confidence thing, right? There's like that, this is where like ego comes into it. And like, I've had pretty bad experiences in business too, but you don't see yourself the way other people do. Yeah. Right? It's true. And I'm over here was going to say, oh my gosh, you should do another summit. And then just seeing the amount of work, it's like becomes one of those things like just because I can doesn't mean that I should.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
Right. Maybe there's another path forward for an event and it doesn't have to be how torturous as it was for you. But
well, and I know what I did wrong. So I went to events put on by Entrepreneur Magazine and I was like, I want this. Okay. Entrepreneur Magazine's budget is a little bit different than my budget. Mm-hmm. And I was in this, mastermind with all event planners. So it's friends of mine who created Podcast Movement, my friend PT who did FinCon, and PT kept saying to me, Erin, if you just put something in front of entrepreneur, woman entrepreneur, manufacturing entrepreneur, online entrepreneur, whatever that is, he's like, it's going to make your life so much easier because it's the niching down, right? And I was like, it's like the listing of everything you shouldn't do, I did, right? And so I know now too of those things of looking back, I was trying to compete with a multi-million at least dollar company who can write articles about these speakers and say, you come speak for us for free and we'll feature you in an article, and they'll do it at a drop,
Right.
I didn't have the magazine. I didn't have all these things. So I definitely know now what I did wrong and I could fix it. But like it's, and not do one in 3 months. And you know what I mean? Like all these like, don't do.
But isn't it interesting that you compared it to doing something that Entrepreneur Magazine did and you still pulled it off and you did it 3 times.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a credit to all of that hard work.
Yeah. No, it was, like I said, it still had impact on people. It's still, I mean, I look back and some of those moments were some of the best. Like, it was amazing. But yeah, like even the Robert Herjavec, I was up, my dad and I were up at 5 a.m. that day. We were at the hotel at 5 a.m. There was some AV issues. One of the guys who was working with me tried to protect me and it kind of backfired. And so we were there at 5 a.m. taping down wires. I mean, like, because I'm like, it's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect. Like, and so I'm so tired that day. Like, it's just so funny. Like, you think you're going to like be all dolled up and perfect. It was like the fact that I just showed up that day was like a miracle. You know what I mean? And so it's just funny looking back on those moments of but still some of the best memories I've had. Like, it was great. It was a blessing and a curse.
Yeah. So where did you go from that point to where you are now?
Yeah. So honestly, I didn't know where I was going to go. I was pretty broken, and I had, she was my good friend, and we decided to start a podcast. And it was originally going to be, through the summit, I came across a lot of companies who were really trying to become, everybody's a technology company. Mm-hmm. Hilti's the perfect example of this. If you know the name Hilti, it's a construction tools company. Like, they're a construction company, and they've got this beautiful office, but they're like a technology company. Like, they have IoT in their tools and all this stuff. So we saw this opportunity where we could feature companies that were looking for the talent pool, right? Mm-hmm. But the talent pool may not they're going to go to Google or Apple, right? They're never going to think of some of these companies. So that was our initial goal, and we started this podcast, and then we joined a network, and through that, and then we needed a studio, and so through that, we started helping other people. Mm. And it's interesting, if you would have said, oh, you're going to start a podcast production company, I would have been like, no. That's not what we're going to do. But it just kind of morphed into that. Mm-hmm. So that's how I ended up here, and just really focusing on helping businesses. Again, it kind of goes full circle, because my first company, it was about storytelling, and that's where it was about driving traffic and storytelling and getting people connected that way and being able to do that. And so it's this full circle moment. And like I said, lessons learned of a partnership and all of that. But it just kind of kept working into, okay, so this is what it's going to be, and this is what it's going to do. We started one thing and then turned into a totally different thing.
And where does Goldman step into the story?
Yeah, so I share this too. So Goldman was end of 2021, and I knew Lynn O'Neill for a really long time. Lynn O'Neill would send, like, one of the people we were talking about, Ted, I met him through Lynn O'Neill because she brought him to the summit, and I knew Lynn, and I knew these amazing people I kept meeting who were from the Goldman Sachs program. So I always had it on my radar. Mm-hmm. And I had applied and gotten in. And at the same time, I was ready to pull the plug on the business. I was just really fed up with stuff. I was tired. It was not going in a direction it needed to go. And so I was like, I'm ready to, at the end of the year, I'm going to pull the plug. And I got into Goldman. Mm-hmm. And then my husband's like, I don't think you can be in the program if you don't have a business. I'm like, well, maybe I can like go off of previous businesses or something. And I'm very happy it worked out the way it did. Yeah. I stayed in, and it made me build my confidence again, but also realize I did actually kind of know what I was doing, but just refined what I knew, right? And it helped me get excited about the business again. I hated at the end of 2021, I was really angry. I had a lot of anger, just about where things were and what was happening, and it made me like get a bright spot for it again and get excited about it. Like, oh, all I have to do is like shift a thing here, shift a thing there, and I can look at this bigger picture. I want to start, getting fun. I would always be so against the banks and so against, or maybe I do want to acquire, like, maybe I do want to acquire this company and build that way. So it brought like a whole different energy to it. And that's when I realized too, I needed to start thinking about splitting up the business too, because there were some things like it really was about a financial decision. It was about, I want to start buying up companies at an expansion perspective. And it's like a marriage. I don't want to get further financially bound. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So at first I was going to like create separate companies, and then I'm like, this is too much work. And so it was all through Goldman though. So it was like a total blessing. And just the people I've met, I call it a family through it. It's just been, it's the gift that just keeps on giving.
Yeah. Well, and I think the networking and showing up for each other, and like you say, I go on hikes with other graduates.
Yeah.
So they more so understand. We understand each other because, perfect example, no one sees that emotional side of it.
Yeah.
They just see you, or they just see a vision of what an entrepreneur is, and it's they're on a yacht, or they just bought this expensive house, and like just because that is what it looks like forward facing doesn't the stress and the anxiety and the things that we have to take on and that we shoulder. It's not just us. If you have employees,
right,
you're responsible for those employees. I mean, there is so much more to it, and I think you being so candid about it really will allow people to understand that it's not for the faint of heart.
It's not for the faint of heart. And I think too, there's ebbs and flows. And I think that's one thing in my life I've had to really learn is like, I get really down in the downs, right? Where I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like ending, and it's like that we've talked about stoicism before too. And it's like, the ups aren't going to last forever, but the downs aren't going to last forever too. And it's like, instead of getting swept up and that was one thing I did with the summit when I felt like I was drowning. It was like, okay, take a breath. What can I control in this moment? I can control traffic to my website. I can turn on some faucets and drive more traffic to my website. That's what I can control right now. I can control I can call 5 more people a day for sponsorship, right? So it's like that focus. And when you are in those valleys where it's like, it's like, just take a deep breath and be like, okay, what are the things that I can actually do? Like COVID, I can't control what the government's going to shut down. I can't control these things. What are the things that I can look at and control in my business right now that can move the needle forward? And I think it's a constant look at that, and it'll take you out of the, oh my gosh, like this is really overwhelming and bad. It's like, okay, just wipe away some of the stuff and, focus a bit more.
So what's next for Erin? What's on the radar as just like with the dog business? Like, oh, this looks interesting. what are you curious about now?
No curiosity right now. Not super curious. But so I really want to focus on pod growth and getting this to a place of, I always joke, like it's like living in the house, like remodeling your house and getting your house to a place that you're ready to sell, from a perspective of maybe you don't want to sell it, but you enjoy living in that house a lot more versus when there's stuff to constantly clean up.
Yes.
So really getting pod growth to a place where our process is like, I know I've got competitors, but it's like really understanding where we are different. And it's been a dig to of our lane was podcast production. That's what we're going to do. And then your marketing team is going to take this. And what we found is that it doesn't work that way because the marketing teams aren't doing what they're supposed to grow the podcast. And so then companies are coming to us saying, well, it's not working. We're going to stop producing. It's like, no, you're not doing 50 things we've recommended here. So it's taking on those things and really being that one size fits all of, it's so much more than just recording a podcast. That's only the tiny, tiny portion of really making this thing work for your business, and focusing on being that company that does all of it and helping as a whole for the podcast, and then the podcast guesting side too. I do want to start acquiring companies for that because I have a team that's starting to build that, and it's a slow roll where I think acquisition is going to be a much faster path. Let's put it that way. So focusing on those, I'm helping my kids with their own businesses. We're working on that. There's something that tugs at me on women empowerment and helping girls and believing in themselves. I go off about this to you daily about women and how we shoot ourselves in the foot, and it drives me insane. I think we can do better. And it's like, what can I, instead of bitching about the problem, what can I do personally to help make the problem better? Can't solve it all, but what can we put together to help women get out of their own way and out of their own head? and it starts at young girls, right?
Yep.
And we're building. We have a little t-shirt brand that I've helped them build, and like they're learning marketing and selling that, and so it's just kind of fun to teach them what profit margins are and what branding is. Like my daughter came to me one day, she was working on a design, and I'm like, well, what do you think about this one? She's like, I don't think it's on brand. I'm like, yes,
That is
yes. I'm so happy you said those words. Like, it's like I've done my job here, but anyway, that's where I'm focused right now.
Okay, so if someone wanted to start a podcast, grow a podcast, where would they find you?
Podgrowth.co. So podgrowth.co is going to be the best place to find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active over on LinkedIn, but definitely head over to podgrowth.co. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them.
And she really is the best. So
thank you.